Maybe never more than now, during what has become known as perhaps the worst drought in Ohio history, has the adage, you can't manage what you don't measure, been more valid or meaningful to those trying to feed a beef cow. With cattlemen looking for alternative feedstuffs in the absence of adequate pasture and hay supply, it's important for those who are balancing the needs of cows in various stages of production to know the nutritional value of the feedstuffs they're utilizing. In this excerpt from one of the OSU Extension Beef Team's 2021 Beef School sessions, Perry County Educator Ted Wiseman goes over the interpretation of a forage analysis and how various quality of forages may need to be supplemented.
So when you get your results, what are you looking for? Again, I'll show you 3 different companies here, the way their results are, but the the only time you want to look at that, in my opinion, is if you're, just so you know what your moisture content and your dry matter content is, okay? For hay, we want them between 10 and 13, 18 to 20%. You know, we could have some possible heating or molding. We get above that. Silage or baleage, a little wetter. They're sealed, you know, a little bit higher with that moisture content. But if I'm comparing nutrients, I want to compare dry matter on a dry matter basis, okay? So you want to use that column when you're looking at the nutrients when you get your analysis back. So some of the things that are going to be on here. Number 1 is your crude protein. That's what a lot of producers look at, that number. There's a lot more things that we want to look at when we get these samples back. But the lower the crude protein value, that's probably a more mature forage. Very immature, you know, we could be up to 26%, but again, our yield's not going to be as much. But some labs can test for that available protein. If you ever had a square bale or a round bale or any type of hay that turned brown, it didn't mold, but turned brown, that was from heat being a little bit too high in moisture. That's caused by a Maillard reaction. Cows love it, but that protein is unavailable to that animal, okay? Couple other numbers we want to look at is our ADF, our acid detergent fiber, and our neutral detergent fiber. We want these numbers to be as low as we can get them. Our acid detergent fiber will give us our more energy, our higher digestibility. Legumes are going to be a little better than grasses. And then for our NDF, we want that lower fiber content, which will give us a higher animal intake. And I put this in small letters here for manure pile. You can tell the digestibility of your forages looking at the manure pile from your cattle. What's the manure piles look like when they're on pasture in the summer? They're flat, they're liquidy, okay? What about in the wintertime? Do they look like a ball cap that you just threw it on the ground? That's an indication of lower digestibility and higher fiber content. So you can tell, you can't give a number to it, but you can tell how digestible your forages are by looking at the manure piles. TDN, this is a number that I really look at when I get my forage samples back. We want a pretty high TDN sample, and I'll admit this is from one of my forage samples in 2019 when it was so crappy in the spring. Not real good, okay? Legumes, we want it to be 50s or in the 60s. Grasses, 50s or better. Then a relative feed value number, it's just a number, but a number of about 100 with an RFE, think of that as a mid to late bloom alfalfa, okay, would be 100. For grasses, we want it 100 or plus. We can get to 80 to 90, but 80 below 80 just probably isn't going to have enough energy or enough gas in it to keep the girls going. Nitrates, a lot of us normally don't check nitrates. You may want to check the nitrates if you put on some urea or some nitrogen on your fields and maybe you got a little too much on there and could be a concern when you make that next cutting. But a lot of nitrate problems show up in a drought year, especially if you're making silage. We've got some fact sheets to tell you how to take that sample. We take it from a specific area of that stock, that corn stalk, but there's the limit values on that. But if you think you're getting into trouble with that, work with your nutritionist because you can really mess them up if you don't have those at the right levels. Okay, just another lab's results here. Again, showing you as dry matter here as is, and then this lab will give you a typical range, okay? And here we've got the minerals here. Here's a TDN. It's a little better sample than mine. It was in the last sample. But but they give you the crude protein available and then the adjusted crude protein, okay? Ash. Ash is something that we normally don't look too much at, but for alfalfa, we want something around an 8%, and grass is about a 6%. This table here just shows a study that they did out in Wisconsin a few years back. The average for the haylage samples that they had was 12.3. The max was 18, minimum of 5.7. For hay, the average was 10.3 maximum, almost 18 again, and a minimum of about 9. If you've got that high of an ash sample in your forages or your haylage, if it's 18%, about a pound, you're feeding about a pound of dirt with every 5 pound of haylage or hay you're giving them. And we've really gotten into some trouble with this. If you're planting some cover crops or some annuals and you're putting them in with a drill, we're going to get higher ash content. Wheel rakes have become more popular. Those wheels are riding right on top of the ground, picking up a little bit of dirt. And disc mowers. When disc mowers first come out, guys wanted to tilt those blades right at the top of the ground to get as much as they could. You hitting mud clods, putting more ash in it. And also when you got those blades set that low, we had several producers that killed their orchard grass because the growing point of orchard grass is 2 inches above the ground. So set them about 3 inches and you'd be a lot better. Just another lab here that gives a way more detail. I'm not going to cover all of this, but again, here they're giving some of the amino acids, some of the volatile fatty acids over here, pretty detailed. This is what a lot of our dairy producers would want to look at, but they give you the minerals. Nice thing about this lab is they give you the RFV and the RFQ. And there you can see that in this sample, the RFQ is a little bit lower than the RFQ. But then they also have a 60-day running average and a 4-year running average, just so you can see where you're at. How they calculate that is dependent on what you would ask for, whether you're wanting some dairy recommendations, or for the beef, this NRC, these are the nutritional Bible. There is hundreds and hundreds of studies that have went in to write each chapter of these books. They have just a chapter on vitamins, just one on minerals, and etc. But all the data collected from universities across the country, about every 10 years, they try to rewrite these. They're pretty pricey books. I've got an old beef one. I don't have the newer version yet, but just be aware that these recommendations, there's a lot of science behind that, is where they come up with these recommendations. So just be aware that that's out there. These are just some tables that I put together. I picked these numbers at random, okay? I picked these TDN levels and then crude protein levels associated with each of them. So this is just a 1,200 pound cow. That's what everybody's beef cows weigh, right? We don't have no 14 or 15 or 1,600 pound cows running out there. But if we took that crappy sample that I had 2 years ago, it was 0.38% TDN. We'll say it had 6% crude protein. If I'm feeding that cow 22 and a half pounds of hay, I would need to also feed that animal almost 5 pounds of corn and almost a half a pound of soybean meal just to meet her maintenance requirements. All right. We get to calving, her TDN requirements go up to 54. These are in percentages, these are whole numbers. So again, if we had that same hay sample at 38 TDN, 6% crude protein, we're giving her 18 pounds of hay, we'd have to bump that corn up to 7 pounds and add another pound to a pound and a half of soybean meal just to meet her maintenance requirements. So what happens if we get to peak milk production? It really goes up. 15 pound of hay, we'd have to take corn up to 10 pounds and still a pound and a half of soybean meal. If we weren't at 60, for a TDN, that's the only hay sample that would meet, and had 10% crude protein, that's the only sample that would meet that animal's requirement. And what happened in 2019? This is a slide. Several of my coworkers sent me forage analysis that they received. These are TDNs. I just ranked them in order. Now, some of these would meet that 49 and 54 TDN, right? But how many of them met that peak milk production in 2019? And I know Stan Smith's on the line, and he was telling me that he had some folks telling him that ODA posted 6 cows that starved to death that winter. The producers said there's no way. They had round bales in front of them all winter long. This is how that happened. They weren't getting enough energy. And then this line here is the protein values. Even though we may have some adequate TDNs, we still want to look at the protein. This sample here, this is a second cutting. TDN isn't bad on this one. Protein's kind of marginal. It's still above 8, but some of these over here, you know, you want to look at both of them. So does a year make a difference? These are samples from last year. Now, these aren't the same farms, not the same fields, not the same whatever. They're just random samples. But last year spring was a little better, right? We can see a few more of these samples will meet that at peak milk production. We only got 2 here that wouldn't be good enough for the last trimester or at calving, but the rest of them aren't bad, okay? Better spring. But boy, look at this sample. It's not bad on TDN, but the protein is way low on that. So it's still, just to emphasize that we need to sample our forages. And then here's second cutting. Again, just because it's second cutting, this one's still, these 3 here still have some work to be done. And then even third cutting out here, these first 2, still the TDN isn't good. So just because it's third cutting, we always think it's better. You know, first fed or first baled, first fed. If we're not analyzing those forages, we still could be getting into some trouble. And then looking at the minerals, this is where you really want to work with your nutritionists. I just throw this slide up there just because there are a lot of interaction and antagonisms with, if you get one out of whack, it could screw up another one. I mean, with phosphorus, I mean, it'll affect zinc, molybdenum, manganese, and let's see, calcium. So, you know, just be aware of that and work with them. If you see some extremely high numbers or extremely low numbers, work with your nutritionist to get those diets balanced in your mineral program where it needs to be. And I'll just finish up with this one, Garth. I always like this saying from Justin Sexton, that anyone who's not soil testing or forage testing still doesn't think fertilizer and hay prices are high enough yet. So with that,